Okay, so welcome to the webinar this afternoon from the Derbyshire Nottinghamshire Stronger Practice Hub. My name's Mary Preston. I'm going to be facilitating this afternoon. And this webinar is the second one in a series that we're running, kind of one every month. And each webinar is going to be focusing on a different part of something that's available on the EEF website. And the aim of this really is just to kind of help practitioners be able to understand what's on the EEF webinar and to kind of go through that with them and to give you a chance basically just to reflect on some of those resources and to think about what that might mean in your setting and for your practice. So the webinar today is focusing on something which is called the STARS approach, and it builds on the webinar that we had last week, which was focusing on the SHREC approach. And the SHREC approach we'll talk about very briefly before we move forward today, just so that it puts it in context. Welcome to the people who are just joining us now. If I could just ask those people who have just joined us, if you could just pop into the chat, put your name and your setting, just so I've got a kind of accurate record of who's attended and who's kind of not been able to attend. We're just trying to tighten up a little bit on people who are booking and not turning up for things, and so it's really helpful for us to know that you've been, basically. So if you could just put your name and your setting in the chat, that would be fantastic. Okay, so we'll be here today talking about the STARS approach, and there'll be a chance for you to kind of reflect on that as well. So the shape of the session basically looks a bit like this. We're just going to very briefly kind of reflect a little bit on that idea around the role of the adult during continuous provision time, but also other times of the day when we're with the children in different kind of activities. And we're going to kind of just link that back to what we learned last session in terms of the SHREC approach. Even if you didn't come last week, you may already know about the SHREC approach. If you didn't come last week and you don't know about the SHREC approach, those materials are available on our Padlet and you'll be able to access a recording. So if that is something that you want to go back and pick up on, you absolutely can do. And it's not going to be a problem if you don't know about it in terms of accessing what we're doing today, because we're going to just very briefly refer to it and just let you know what it is. But most of the session, we're going to be thinking about something which is called the STARS approach. And this really focuses on building on those high quality interactions that we get from using the SHREC approach and thinking about how we can use those high quality interactions to support really good levels of learning and levels of involvement. So it's thinking about how we can kind of take those high quality interactions to the next level, really. And that's really what the focus is going to be all about today. So when we think about the role of the adult, we're often thinking about the role of the adult in continuous provision time when we're with the children, when we're engaging in that play-based learning, and we are thinking about those high quality interactions are referred to in the SHREC approach. So just as a very quick recap for those particularly who've never heard of SHREC before, just so that when I'm talking about it, you know what it is. I'm just going to very briefly go through that, but not in any level of detail. And as I say, if you do want more detail, you can go to our YouTube channel and just look at the webinar on the SHREC approach. So the SHREC approach has been shared by the EEF. It was developed at Sheringham Nursery, and it's just a model really to support us with our interactions. And SHREC stands for the following things. So the sh bit stands for sharing. So where at the beginning of an interaction we share attention with the child, we focus on what the child is focused on, and we get at the child's level and we really engage with what they're engaged in. That's then followed by responding. So we're following the child's lead with that, and we're responding to not just their verbal cues, but also their non-verbal signals, things like facial expressions, gestures, play actions that they might be engaging in, but we're essentially noticing what they're doing and responding to that in some way. And then following on from that response, we begin to expand. So for example, if that was verbally, we might be repeating what they've said and adding in an additional word or turning it into a short phrase. If it's that they've done an action, you know, brumming a car, for example, we might pick up a car and brum it along next to it. So it's just that expansion. And then ultimately what we're thinking that that will lead to and what you're aiming for is this to and fro, the serve and return interactions, the conversation. And it's those really high quality interactions that underpin so much of the learning in early years. And you'll know if you were on the webinar last week that the EEF have got lots of great resources to support with this approach, including a fantastic poster that you can use in your setting, which has got lots of cues and suggestions for kind of sentence starters that will really help you support that oral language development. And in addition, on their website, they have a fantastic video, which you can also watch, which shows that approach in action. So I'm not going to talk about that at length, but I just want to kind of put that on your radar if it's something that you're not already aware of. I know definitely there are people in here today. Sam for sure is one who was here last week on the Shrek webinar, so it should dovetail really well if you're already aware. Today we're going to be really focusing on building on that Shrek approach. So we're kind of making an assumption that we've got those high quality interactions already in place, that ourselves or our staff or within our team or our setting, we've got that really skilled conversation that we're able to have with children. We're able to engage with children. We're interacting with them. We're not interrupting their learning or kind of stopping their learning through our kind of the way that we initiate conversation with them. So we're assuming that there's that skill there in those high quality interactions. What we're going to be focusing on today is how we then can use those high quality interactions in a way which can really support and scaffold learning. And you've probably heard the term scaffolding before. It's quite commonly used in early years, and it's to do with how we kind of help children move their learning forward. Just before I go on to the next slide, I know we've had a few people just join in the last kind of few minutes, so just wanted to take a moment to say welcome to all of you and thanks for joining us. If you can, it would be really helpful if you could just pop your name and your setting into the chat, so then I've got a record of everybody who's here. If you are able to turn your camera on, I would be super grateful, but again, I totally understand if that's not viable for you in the context that you're in at the moment. I'm just glad that you're here to hear what we're going to be talking about. But yeah, if you could put your name in the chat, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Hello. Nice to see you. Okay, so thinking then about the STAIRS approach, I just want us to have a think for a moment about another model which the EEF have shared on their website called the Early Years Pedagogical Continuum. And there is some fantastic information on their website all about this. And if you're not familiar with the Early Years Pedagogical Continuum, I'm just going to put a link into the chat so that if you want to at a later date, you can have a look at that. Again, if you don't pick the link up off the chat, don't worry, because that will be available in the materials on the Padlet at the end of the session. I'm going to kind of talk to you about it in a nutshell, but there's more information there, obviously, on the website if you want to go and have a look at it again. But the Early Years Pedagogical Continuum talks to us about the types of activities that we might do with our children, and it helps us to think about the different contexts in which learning might take place, and it helps us to think about that in the round and to move away, I suppose, from thinking that teaching and learning, or that learning and educating, could only take place in this very kind of adult directed context. So on this pedagogical continuum, up at one end, what we've got is adult-led activities. So this might be adult-initiated activities. So it might be, for example, I don't know, if you're in a home-based setting, you might be doing some baking with some children. So you are likely to have initiated that. It's possible that it might have been child-initiated, but it might also have been adult-initiated. It's going to be quite structured, and there's going to be kind of less flexibility to respond to the children's needs, because ultimately you're following a recipe, for example. Obviously, I know you might be doing baking in a different way, and that's not to preclude that, but that's an example. In a school-based setting, it might be more like a phonics session, where you might be, using a phonics SSP, and you're obviously going to be really guided by that SSP, and there's limited opportunity for the children to kind of lead that. At the other end of the continuum, you've got a child-led activity. So these are typically where children are engaged in play that they have directed or initiated themselves. And there's often very little activity that involves the adult. So it's very much children working on their own, typically, and using the resources that are on offer. And this is, a really useful activity for children to do in terms of consolidating their learning, practicing skills, rehearsing skills. So very valuable, but it doesn't particularly involve an adult, typically, apart from they might have provided the resources, as an example. In the middle of the continuum, we've got 3 different types of activities, and they all fit under that umbrella, which we would call guided play. So all of these 3 types of activities involve adults and children working together collaboratively in a play-based context. So they've got those things in common, but they're slightly different. And I'll just kind of walk you through the slight difference, really. And it's part of the same continuum. So over there on the left, it's guided play, but it's initiated by the adult. The child still has scope to guide the activity through the choices that they make, but those choices might be limited by what the adult has planned. So there's opportunities for the children to be involved and engaged and to make choices, but it's still adult initiated and quite adult guided. At the other end, next to the child-led activity, we've got this guided play, which is child initiated. So it's very much something that the child has chosen, that the child has started, that the adult gets involved in, and the adult still might guide the activity, but only really through their suggestions or their actions. And then in the middle, you've got something here which the EEF describe as collaborative pedagogy. That might have been initiated by the child or the adult, and it's very much a kind of balanced version, I suppose, of guided play, where they are co-conspirators really in the play. The adult and the child have got equal kind of responsibility. They're making equal choices, but they're each contributing something to that process of guided play. And what we find really with the STAIRS approach, which we'll come to, is that it's very relevant to any of those activities where adults and children are working alongside each other. So it's just important to kind of be aware of that continuum when we're thinking about STAIRS, in the same way that Shrek is relevant at any point when adults are interacting with children, whether it's adult initiated or child initiated or anywhere in between. So is the STAIRS approach. And really what the STAIRS approach is focused on is how we kind of scaffold and support and move children's learning forward. And it's very linked to Vygotsky's theory around the zone of proximal development. So in that theory, Vygotsky identified this kind of bunch of things that learners can do by themselves. So they are typically operating in that area when they are rehearsing, they're repeating, they're practicing, they're consolidating their learning, and they don't need an adult there or a more knowledgeable other to support them with that. Vygotsky also identified a much bigger range of things in that kind of wider circle, things that the learner can't do yet, even if they had support. So as an example of that, it might be, can they climb up the ladders onto the slide, for example, but actually they can't crawl yet. So we know that they're not yet able to do that, even if we help them. The bit that Vygotsky identified as being kind of really important and really significant when it comes to moving learning forward and supporting children to move on to the next stage is the bit that sits in between those. And he called this the zone of proximal development. And those are kind of the things that the learners can do if they have a little bit of support from an adult or a more knowledgeable other. So that might be an older sibling, it might be an older child in school, it might be a peer who's just developmentally a little bit further along than they are. But fundamentally, it's something that they can nearly do, but they just need a little bit of extra support. And that's where we really see this high quality learning taking place. We see children developing their ideas in a manageable way, extending their thinking, extending their skills, and challenging themselves. But as well as challenging themselves, they're feeling success because they're able to do it with just that bit of support. And this is where the STAIRS approach can really help us, because it gives us a model of how to give that support in the most effective way. And it links to ideas around sustained shared thinking. You may have heard of this term before. It kind of sounds complicated. It's not complicated really, and you're probably doing it in your settings every day, but you may not call it this. It's basically where, and it doesn't have to be an adult and a child actually, but it's basically where two or more people work together to solve a problem. And they might be clarifying an issue, evaluating an activity, or extending a narrative. And a key feature is that all parties contribute to the interaction. But the critical bit here is that one is slightly more knowledgeable than the other. So one person is going to be aimed at extending and developing the other person's thinking. And in our context, it's about those adults that we are thinking about how do we extend and develop the child's thinking or skills or behaviours. And you'll see there a quote there from a couple of sources actually. So there's Silver's research, but also a DFE document from a few years ago. So the STAIRS approach can really help us to be effective engaging in this sustained shared thinking. And obviously it takes practice and we can get better at that all the time, but it gives us a model to kind of hang that on and help us think about, well, you know, what does it look like if I want to do this sustained shared thinking really well? The other way that we might think of it, or that we might kind of talk about it, is to think of it as scaffolding. So it's a kind of a similar term, and this quote's come from Julian Grenier's blog on the EEF, which you've got the link to in the chat, obviously. I'm just going to read that out for you now. So scaffolding involves providing temporary support for a child during a task to adjust the level of challenge. This can include educators helping with elements of the task that are too difficult for the child to accomplish on their own, so that the child can concentrate on what they can do to gradually complete that challenging task. Or an educator might provide support which makes a simpler task more challenging. So it's thinking about how we can add a little bit to what's happening to either reduce the level of difficulty a little bit. We don't want to make it so easy that the child doesn't have any challenge, but we might want to just reduce the challenge a tiny bit to make it achievable. Or actually, if we see it's quite easy and it's not really challenging to the child at all, we might want to add in a variable that makes it a bit more tricky. So obviously there's a lot going on in there, because we need to know our children really well, and we need to really understand those development trajectories to think about, you know, what's the next step for this child. We know where they're at, but what's coming next? And then we need to be able to think on our feet, to be able to think about off the, you know, kind of in the moment, how do we make this a little bit more challenging or a little bit less challenging? So there's a lot going on there. And I think, you know, it can be really easy when we talk about something like scaffolding for us to think of it as something very simple. And in some respects, when we see it happening, it can appear to be very simple, but there's a lot going on mentally with the adult there to make that look simple. And so the STAIRS model can really help us kind of break that down into what is it that we need to be doing to make this successful and to be effective when we're trying to do that scaffolding. So something for us to think about is that this can happen anywhere in our settings. It might be as part of spontaneous activities or planned activities, could be indoors, could be outdoors, it could be with individual children, with groups or pairs of children. It could be, as we've talked about with the pedagogical continuum, in child-initiated activities or in adult-directed activities. Fundamentally, it's anywhere that adults and children are coming together. There's a potential opportunity there for learning and for adults to support that learning with appropriate scaffolding. So when we think about what we need to make that happen and to make that work well, there's some really key things that we need to think about. We definitely need the adult who knows the child well, and I've kind of touched on that already, because in order to think about what's the child's next steps, we need to know where they currently are. So that real kind of strong relationship with the key person, for example, or whoever it is that they're working with, is really critical to this, because we are not able to think about a child's next steps if we don't know where they currently are. The shared attention, which we know is part of the Shrek model, is really important. And I think sometimes that can be really difficult in a busy setting because we have so many demands on our time and our attention. But that being able to take some time, whilst obviously still scanning, but to share that attention with the adult and the child and focus on the same thing together and genuinely tune in to what the child is doing or interested in. The next thing that's been identified is the child who knows what the end goal is and how to be successful. And that isn't necessarily about adults setting a goal. It's about a child being clear in themselves with what it is they're trying to do. What is it they want the outcome to be? What are they aiming to kind of achieve? And what will that look like, ideally, when they are successful? It can be something really simple, like, putting on hats and gloves, and the goal is to be able to put them on and make sure that the gloves are on the right hands and that all the fingers are in all of the slots. It's not about complex goals necessarily. It's about goals which are appropriate to that child's level of development. And then the next thing on the list there is that warm, encouraging adults who help the child to believe I can do this. And part of that, I think, is tricky because part of that is about adults having the time. Sometimes as adults, it can be so challenging as parents, as practitioners, when we're trying to support children with doing things, sometimes there's a time pressure attached to that. And so it can be very tempting when we're in that particular situation to kind of feel that time pressure and almost to help too much. And actually, if we help too much, in effect, we're communicating, I don't think you can do this, I'm going to do it for you. But actually, we really need to try and slow that down if we can, to really think about how do I encourage this child to do this and how do I make time and space for them to be able to do it, regardless of how long that is going to take them. And, it's not a criticism. I've definitely been in that place, definitely with my own children as well as children that I've taught. Sometimes we can't always manage it, but actually, if we're trying to do it sometimes, I think that's better than not trying to do it any of the time. Another key thing that can be really supportive is thinking about your role as an adult and how you manage the choices that children have. So if we give children lots and lots and lots of choices, sometimes that can be overwhelming. Sometimes if we give them too few choices, then we're not encouraging them to actually think through things and think about what do I need, what's going to help, what's going to not help. So being able to think sensitively and thoughtfully around what choices do I offer them can be really helpful because you want to give them choice, but you don't want to give them too much choice. And equally, sometimes they might be involved in a task where you can think about the choices that they have in a way that might guide them down one path or another. Or it might force them to try something which poses a challenge, for example. So there's lots of different ways in which you can use those choices and how you present those choices to children, which can make a massive difference to how the learning unfolds. And then obviously we need that adult who's skilled in the interactions, and that's partly through the Shrek model, which can help with that, but it's also through the STAIRS model. And when we think about what does that mean in terms of skillful interactions, the kind of things we're thinking about are here. We want just enough help so that children can succeed, but not so much help that we're doing it for them. So we're trying to kind of give the bare minimum of support that can just help them get over the line. And then over time, we want to be gradually reducing the amount of support that we're giving so that children become increasingly independent. We want to be teaching children strategies actively so that they are becoming increasingly independent. And sometimes these kind of skills are built into our daily routines, things like putting on our coats, putting on our hats, putting on our gloves, doing our shoes. Tidy up time. Are we really supporting children to do that themselves, or are we doing it for them because we want to get on to the next activity? John Dewey did some such interesting work in his research where he really looked at how much more meaningful learning can be for children when it's rooted in purposeful tasks. So I think there's a lot for us to think about at things like snack time and tidy up time and all of those tasks that we do as we go through the day when we're we're doing the same things every day, but actually we're often falling into the trap of doing things for the children because it's quicker and more efficient, but then we're missing the opportunity to support them with becoming more independent. We don't need to give the fruit out because the children can give the fruit out from a very early age, as an example. We can look at strategies for teaching them how to put their coat on rather than constantly being the one that takes it off and puts it on their shoulder and helps them get their arms in. We can look at those kind of different ways of doing it. There's the French model where they lay it on the floor and slide their arms in and flip it over their heads. It's much easier. And it's thinking about how we offer those opportunities to help them become more independent all the time. And once they begin, obviously, to become more independent and more capable and they're able to do those tasks unaided, we might think about how we adjust the level of challenge. So where we've, for example, got a child who's brilliant at time to tidy up and they're great at putting things back in boxes, we might think, actually, I'm going to ask them to do a little job which is going to mean they've got to sort things. We're going to give them 2 boxes to put things in, and we're going to put the red things in one box and the blue things in another box. And that's the next level of challenge. So it's all the time with this scaffolding, thinking about what's the next step and how can I just turn the dial slightly to make it a little bit more tricky for them when they're ready. And then that obviously starts that process of scaffolding all over again, because as soon as they're doing a task that's in that zone of proximal development, they're going to need a little bit more support. But if you think back to that diagram with the circles, all the time we're pushing that circle outwards. So what they're capable of doing independently gets bigger and bigger, and so does what they're capable of doing with support. So it's really thinking about how we move through that kind of trajectory. So the STAIRS approach, the model which we're focusing on, is really quite simple, very much like the Shrek approach is simple. We've got these kind of sequence of 6 things for us to try and remember, and I'm going to go through those in a bit more detail. You'll have the slides for this on the Padlet, so you'll be able to print them off. If you want to print this out, you can do. There's some resources also obviously on the EEF website which you can print off to support as well. So the first thing is the shared attention, which is exactly the same as with the high quality interactions. We've then got thriving together, which is about that real engagement together, avoiding frustration, those important features which need highlighting by the adult to draw children's attention to them, reviewing progress, so reflecting and thinking back over what's happened so far and what we're going to do next, and then self-motivation, so the support which enables children to keep going and build resilience even when things get tricky. And I'm going to talk through each one of those in a bit more detail now. So the first one, the shared attention. Again, like Shrek, this involves getting down to the children's level. We're not going to be doing this standing up while they're down on the floor. We need to be down there with them, and we need to be tuned into what they're tuned into. We need to be looking at it. We need to be responding to it, even if it's just through our facial gestures. It might be the odd word or two, but we need to basically tune in to begin with. We need to notice what they notice and demonstrate that we're noticing it. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that. And whilst we're doing that, that's what's happening on the outside. On the inside, in our brains, we need to be thinking about how might this activity unfold? What might the child be able to learn here or achieve? We need to be really careful that when we're thinking about that we keep flexible. This isn't about us going to a child's activity, interrupting it and imprinting what we think should happen next. It's about thinking about what I would call possible lines of development. So your brain's thinking of multiple ways in which this might unfold, which could be relevant to this particular child. And I think this is where, on the outside, this looks easy. On the inside, it's not easy at all, because on the outside, it just looks like somebody goes and sits down next to a child. On the inside, your brain needs to be kind of in overdrive, doing a lot of thinking, as well as also responding to the child. So once we're in that kind of zone there where we've kind of tuned into the child, we've kind of got our brains going, thinking about what might unfold, those possible lines of development, we move on to the thriving together. And that's where we really just relax into the activity. We just enjoy playing alongside them. We are engaging in those high quality interactions. So we're ensuring that, as well as thinking about how we respond, that we are making the right environment for the child to respond. The pauses are super important. We know that children need much longer than we naturally expect in order to be able to receive what we've said or done, think about that, formulate a response, and then share their response. So it's about really slowing down our kind of adult pace of interactions. Share that positivity, really be encouraging to the child and supportive. And when they might be struggling, or things aren't quite working alongside them, playing alongside them, modeling that perseverance and resilience. And that can lead into the next thing, really, which is about avoiding frustration. So where a child is trying to do something that's just that little bit outside what they're capable of, and they might be struggling and they might be getting frustrated and exasperated, it's really where your actions can kind of come into play, because this is where you might think about, oh, is there a way we could simplify this task? Is there something that I could do to help here? But it's also about supporting the child to take a risk and try something that they maybe think is a bit too difficult and they might be a little bit worried to do. So thinking about ways in which we can support that and demonstrate that even though it feels tricky and it feels a little bit, nerve-wracking, that actually it will be okay and they probably can do it. And even if they can't do it, they can have another go, and that's all part of the learning. And at this point, it might be where you gently step in to do something for them, or where you model something to show how it could be done. Or it might be that you do a little bit of it. So I don't know, for example, if they were trying to do a tricky jigsaw and they couldn't quite fit, you might, for example, at this point suggest, oh, what if you turn that piece round? If they've been kind of banging the piece into the puzzle and it won't fit, rather than them getting completely exasperated and chucking it down and walking off, just an intervention there to suggest, oh, maybe if we turn it, how about if we do it like this? Just could be that little bit of support that they need to do it. And then when they pick up the next piece, they might then turn that naturally themselves. They might not. You might have to offer that scaffolding again. But eventually, over time, they will come to learn to do that for themselves, and you'll be able to move to the kind of next step. So it's not rocket science, but I do think it can be tricky to do, especially in a busy setting where you've got lots of demands on your time. And I think the first step really is about raising our own consciousness of it and developing our own awareness of how do we think we're being and how are we actually being. I think we all start out with the best of intentions. I know I definitely do, but I also can easily think of examples where I know it hasn't been easy to do this kind of thing. So sometimes it's thinking about how do we make space for that to happen. So the next part of the stairs, the I, is this important features need highlighting. And there's been a lot of research which really supports the importance of noticing in terms of learning, and how important noticing is for learning. And what we know from the research is that children do notice things themselves, but they don't always notice the most relevant things. And adults have a real role to play here in terms of drawing children's attention to the most significant things. So it's about that conversation that you have with the child so that you're able to then highlight those important aspects. So it might be drawing their attention to maybe why something isn't working in the way that they thought it would do, or drawing their attention to another resource that might be helpful that they haven't noticed, for example. And it's keeping that focus on the end goal and supporting the children to stay focused on that end goal. So sometimes children can get a little bit sidetracked, for example, particularly if something gets tricky. So it's, kind of refocusing back on, well, let's remember, what are we trying to do here? What is it that we want to happen? And refocusing that, and then kind of talking through, okay, so what's the problem here? What do we think might help with this? And then that's a really nice opportunity for you to be able to kind of build in that attention to noticing, but also to build in those little bits around the avoiding frustration. And We don't necessarily want children to find the answer straight away because there's value in the trying out the possibilities. So this bit in the middle here about giving children time to try a few different ways of solving a problem before you step in and help is really important. It really helps them to develop resilience, but it also helps them to build their kind of natural curiosity and also to have that experience of working things out for themselves, which is very, very empowering to children. So being able to kind of keep an eye on that and step in as the frustration is beginning to build rather than stepping in before you really need it. But you can use that feedback and you can also, for example, minimize distractions. So say, I don't know, a child's building a really elaborate structure on the carpet and there are other children around that the structure's a little bit at risk. We can make that space for that work to take place by engaging the other children in another bit of building nearby, for example. So just kind of have a think about those things when we're kind of engaging in that play. And then as we come towards the end of that STAIRS process, there's the reviewing progress. So thinking about how we help the child to reflect on what's happening. Are we making progress towards that end goal? Do we need to change something? What might help? What's the problem? All of those kind of things. And potentially making suggestions, oh, well, maybe we could do this. Or what about if we tried that? And we don't always have to suggest something that will definitely work. We could suggest something that might nearly work, and then the child might be able to build on that so that they discover ultimately the thing that does work. It's kind of walking the child through the thinking process rather than just taking them straight towards the end point and missing out all of that thinking process. And last but not least, which is really important, is the self-motivation. So really encouraging the child to do as much as they can. And a huge part of that is resisting our urge as adults to step in and be helpful. Because I think as early as practitioners, we're primed to be helpful and we want to help the children, and we certainly don't want to see them suffer in any way. But sometimes a little bit of struggling is not the same as suffering. And actually it can be really a positive experience for them in terms of how that builds their self-esteem, how that builds resilience, how that builds executive function. So lots of positives coming out of that low level of struggle. And that remembering to reduce the support as soon as you can so the child doesn't become dependent. It's this Goldilocks principle, which I think is a great way that Julian Grenier kind of sums it up. He says, offer just the right amount of support, not too much and not too little. Makes it sound easy. It's definitely not, but it's definitely possible. And that's not to say, that in all of our interactions with children, we're going to be able to do this model all of the time. But what I think is important is that we should be aspiring to doing this. We need to try and be doing some of it some of the time on some days. And if we're doing more tomorrow than we were doing today, that's a win, I think. It's very challenging in a setting when you've got multiple children in particular. What good practice looks like. It's not always possible to kind of deliver that practice in the ideal way that you want to, but that doesn't mean that we should stop aspiring for it and that we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back when we do manage to fit it into everything else. So we are going to do a little activity now. I'm going to drop a document into the chat. I say I'm going to do that, just bear with me a second. So I'm going to drop a document into the chat, and then you should be able to open this document, and it just is a one-page summary of what is on those slides. So it's just a kind of one-page overview of the STAIRS approach. If you've taken notes, you won't need that, but if you haven't, you will. We're going to watch a video. And what I'd like you to do is just jot down where you notice elements of STAIRS taking place in this video. And there'll be times when you notice it happening, but there also might be things where you think, oh, there was a missed opportunity there. Maybe the adult could have done this, but she didn't do that. And that's not to be critical, it's just to be reflective. And we'll have time to watch it, and then we'll have time to go into breakout rooms and just have a conversation between yourselves for sort of 5 minutes about what you've noticed, and then we'll come back and share together. And I think what would be really helpful when we go into those breakout rooms is we might also have some time to reflect on well, what about in our own settings? But for now, we're just going to watch the video and see what we can notice in that video in terms of that scaffolding and what are the adults doing in there. Okay, so here is the video. It's from Queensland. Personally, it's one of my favourite little videos of children learning and of practitioners engaging with children. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And then we'll reconvene. It's about 5 minutes long. So, yeah.
Goodness me. Goes all the way up and off the bridge. So now how do you get the rest of the treasure out? That was very fast. Alright, so you've got this organised. So I wonder where you're going to put the treasure so it's safe.
You put the treasure.
Ben, can you see what the problem is here? Have a look. If that bucket falls fast, look where Daniel's standing. Daniel, is that safe?
No,
So how can we make this safe? What do you think we need to do?
Walk away.
Walk away? How will the people know to walk around here, not to be underneath the bucket? What could we do?
Make a fence.
Make a fence? Okay, that would be a great idea. Shall we go and make a fence?
Oh, play this up game now.
You'd like to play in the
You
game?
hold this up,
But
okay?
Daniel, did you hear what the problem was? They're worried when the treasure bucket comes up and down, if you're standing close by, we're worried that someone's going to get bumped on the head.
All the sharks or hookers might bite you.
They might. So Xavier's thinking a fence.
And then the shark will stay here.
Okay, Xavier, how can we make a fence, do you think?
Maybe of the making area.
Something at the making area? All right, well, I'll leave this down here. So they're making signs to say stay behind the fence. Did you put your name on it, Hayden?
Yes, I did.
You glued your name on?
Yeah.
So are you ready for the words on your painting now?
Yeah.
Can you see what's happening to the paper? How can we fix that? You're right then.
Where did you find the...
Great job. All right, so stay away from the fence. Is that right?
Yeah.
So does that mean, Daniel, do they have to wait on the other side of the fence?
Yeah, on the other side.
Okay.
Okay.
Stay behind the fence.
I'll hold it. But I need it.
Reese, I wonder if those robots might be able to come and visit this area and do some helping. Are they fixing robots? I'll hold one while you make one work. Just see with this one here. This needs to get joined onto the card here. What to do? Do the robots read, Reese, or do they need their controllers to do the reading?
I need the controller.
Do they? Okay, so if you're going to bring the robots over, you'll need to ask the controllers to read the signs. Do you know what the signs are saying?
Yes.
The signs are telling the people to stay behind the fence while the treasure is going up and down.
Yeah, because the sharks might eat
Okay, so just a fairly short little snippet there, but lots going on. So what I'm going to do now is to just pop you into breakout rooms. just to give you a chance to talk to each other about what you've noticed. I know some of you haven't got your microphones working, and that's okay. I think it still will be useful for you to sit in and hear the other people discussing. And then we'll come back together and kind of talk about what we've noticed, but also take a minute just to kind of think about how much you, or if you're in a setting, the staff in your setting, actually are able to engage in that scaffolding, and think about what any barriers might be to that, and whether or not there's anything you could do to overcome those barriers to kind of make a little bit more opportunity for adults to be able to engage with children in that way, and to really put that scaffolding into place. Welcome back, everyone. Would anybody like to share anything that they kind of talked about in their group that they kind of felt was significant or particularly interesting? I would encourage you to be brave here.
I'm not sure if my microphone's still on. Can you hear me?
I can.
Andy, hi, it's Andy Brennan
hi.
from Darlington Borough Council. I've just been having a lovely chat with a colleague and another colleague who unfortunately couldn't get a mic to work, but we had lots of thumbs up for the things that we were talking about. And I think what we really liked was just how she kind of managed the number of children there, that she was allowing them. We loved the part where the little boy was making the fence on his own while she was supporting the other children to write their signs. And so that was a clear step in the direction that we were chatting about. And the thing that I liked that she did a couple of times with one of the little children, he was struggling to put the peg on his painting. So she did it, showed him, and then kind of got his attention to watch her do it again, and he took the peg and then put that peg on. And I thought that was a really key moment in his little face when he'd done it. I just thought that was wonderful. So yeah, and we chatted about lots of other things as well, but I won't monopolize the conversation, but we did have a really good chat, and the video was lovely.
Yeah, I mean, that little bit with the peg, just such great modelling, really sensitive scaffolding, and particularly because there was more than one peg, you know, she modelled it and then he did it. And it was just very spontaneous, but so sort of perfectly tuned in, I think, to where he was at. I thought I completely agree with you. I thought that was really well done. Grace, did you have your hand up a second ago?
Oh yes, we were saying this is actually what Georgie said, but I'll say it for her. She's not feeling great. So we were saying how it was really good that she was getting them to like do that problem solving. You could quite easily say, "Oh, someone's going to get hurt. Everybody stand back, stand back." Whereas she didn't. She said, "What we're going to do to make it safe," and that. But yeah, you were saying how it makes you think that different way. You know, don't give up. Yeah, just don't always find the solution for them because they are more than capable of thinking about themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And I think that's especially relevant in that situation because it's quite high risk with that bucket full of kind of heavy things. So it would be really easy as an adult to kind of jump in there because you see the danger instantly. But actually, she managed the danger by just holding it and then talk to them about how we could make it safe. And she just kept that very calm, but really scaffolded that problem solving to help them to generate an idea and then to follow through with the idea. And actually that whole thing just became a huge piece of learning involving lots of different children. And it would have been so easy for that to go a completely different way if she'd have just taken hold of it's too dangerous, we need to do X, Y, Z. So yeah, absolutely, I completely agree with that. Thank you, Georgie.
She also used that boy that wanted to come and play. She used that as a way of like refocusing all the other children by saying
recapping.
Yeah, like recapping the learning for everybody, but also getting him up to speed so he could join in.
Yeah, I thought there was some great moments in there. And I think, like you said, Andy, to think about how many children she had there and how she managed that also was really interesting. And I think often, you know, I work across a lot of different settings now, and what I typically see is where adults do engage with children in that way, the requirement for them to be constantly managing stuff diminishes because actually the children are kind of hyper focused on whatever the task in hand is, and it draws children to it because it's so engaging. So yeah, some really nice reflections. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to move us forward because it's 1 minute to 4 now. And so I'm going to kind of bring us to a close. Hopefully you found it interesting to hear about the STAIRS model. The resources from today, so the links to the EEF website, and also the slide deck, if you want to have a look at that, a link to the video, that's all available on our Padlet, and you can scan the QR code to find that. If you're on your phone, and then you can't obviously use it to scan it, I'm just going to pop all the links into the chat. So there's a Padlet link there. That's where all of the resources will sit for the session. So you'll be able to pick those up at a later time if you want to go back to them, or if you're in a setting and you want to use them with your team, you can obviously do that. We've kind of designed these, the session will be recorded, so if you wanted to use it in your setting as part of a staff meeting, you could do that, and the resources would all be there to share. So that's that. And then if I could just ask you before you leave to just complete feedback for us. It's really helpful for us to know kind of what you think about these sessions, if you think there's anything we could do to make them better, or any particular themes that you'd really like to see. That would be really helpful for us to know. It also helps us to kind of advocate for the hubs with the DFE, if we can demonstrate that we're having impact on settings. So that's also really helpful. Equally, just be open and honest in terms of what you think and how you found the session. So the only thing beyond that really is just a kind of heads up of the things that will be coming up. So you might know, or you might not know, that the Stronger Practice Hubs have been funded until 2029, which we are super pleased about. So here at Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire Stronger Practice Hub, we've got a range of things kind of in the pipeline. We are going to be doing an EEF webinar every month, and the next 4 webinars are all going to be focusing on the things that are on the early evidence store, focusing on executive function and self-regulation, and Rebecca Betts will be leading those. So please look out for those and sign up for those if you would like to find out more. Obviously you can book on and attend them live, or again you'll be able to watch them afterwards on the YouTube channel if that's more convenient. And then just make sure that you're registered with us, because we've got a lot of developing offers, and if you're registered with us you'll be the first to hear about it. We're going to be launching in September bespoke advisory sessions where you'll be able to book in with myself or one of our other kind of senior partners for a half-an-hour advisory session. If you've just got a challenge in your setting that you just want to be able to talk through with another experienced professional, then that's what you can use those sessions for. We've got our room leader networks. So those are face-to-face events, and we have a baby room leaders network, 2-year-old room leaders network, and a 3 to 4-year-old room leaders network, and they are open to people who work in PVIs as well as people who work in school-based settings. We will also be launching from September our SEND networks. They'll be half-termly, and you'll either be able to attend half a day face-to-face, or you'll be able to watch 2 online webinars kind of focused on the same content. And then last but not least, we've got 4 local area conferences for our 4 different local areas. And the one that's coming up first is in Derby, and that's on the 15th of October. And that's really focused on developing new provision for under 3s. So we've got a range of different workshops there, all focused on working with under 3s. As with everything for the Stronger Practice Hub, it's free for you to attend. We are absolutely happy for you to come to anything and everything. We do really strongly beg you that if you can't attend for any reason, you just let us know, because then we're able to offer you a place to somebody else. I think that is everything from me. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to sort of hang around for 5 or 10 minutes afterwards, so we can, chat about anything then. So thank you so much for attending, and hopefully it's been a useful session. Thank you.